She was running barefoot from her stepfather's farm, the cold dirt biting into her solace, the moon a pale witness above, but before the shadows swallowed her whole, a warrior man caught up and saved her. The wind tore at her hair as if the night itself wanted to pull her back. Behind her, the crack of a whip echoed, not meant for the horses this time, but for her. Every heartbeat hammered like a drum of warning. The smell of smoke from the farmhouse mingled with dust, carrying memories of years she swore she'd leave behind. Her lungs burned, yet she ran faster, guided only by desperation. Through the tall grass at the edge of the prairie, a figure emerged, broad-shouldered, chest bare against the cold, with long black hair streaming like a banner of war. His eyes, sharp as flint, locked onto hers. She nearly screamed until she saw his hand extend, not in capture, but in salvation. "Stop running," he said, his voice low, steady, the kind that made fear pause. But how could she stop? She had spent years escaping in her mind, and tonight was the first time she dared with her body. The warrior stepped between her and the distant lanterns of the farm. The air thickened, the scent of leather, horse sweat, and the faint tang of iron on his skin. He looked like a man forged from the earth itself, carrying the weight of a story untold. She froze, chest heaving. For the first time in years, someone wasn't chasing her to hurt her. Someone had caught her to keep her alive. And behind them, in the dark, her stepfather's voice roared across the fields. "Bring her back, or by God, you'll regret it." The girl froze in the tall grass, her chest heaving, eyes wide with terror. She was 25, yet in that moment she felt like a child again, a child trapped in a house that was never a home. Her stepfather's voice carried across the prairie like a whip through the night, sharp enough to cut through her skin without touching her. "Bring her back," he bellowed. "She's mine to deal with." The warrior stood unmoving, a dark silhouette etched against the silver moonlight. His hand was still extended, patient yet unyielding. Something in his gaze rooted her in place, not pity, not command, but a fierce kind of recognition, as though he'd seen her pain before, as though he carried his own. Her breath came out in gasps. "He'll kill me if I go back." The warrior's jaw tightened. He turned his head toward the farmhouse lights, listening. The distant flicker of lanterns drew nearer, men with rifles and dogs closing in. The prairie wind shifted, carrying the scent of gunpowder. "You keep running." The warrior said, his voice low but firm, "You'll be hunted down before dawn." He glanced at her torn dress, her bare feet sliced by stones. "You'll collapse, and they'll drag you back." The girl shook her head, tears streaking her dusted cheeks. "Then what am I supposed to do? I won't go back." 4. A heartbeat, silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of the approaching dogs. Then, with the swiftness of someone used to making choices in war, the warrior stepped forward and pulled her behind him. His chest rose with calm. Defiance, as though daring the night to test him. "My name is Tahoma," he said without turning, his eyes still fixed on the approaching lanterns. "And from this moment, no one touches you." The girl blinked, stunned. No one had ever spoken like that for her. Her name trembled on her lips. "Evelyn?" Tahoma gave a small nod, memorizing it as though a bond had been sealed in that exchange of names. Then he crouched slightly, scanning the prairie. His senses seemed sharper than hers, the twitch of his ear at a dog's bark, the narrowing of his eyes at a shadow moving fast. "They're closing in," he muttered. "We have to move." Evelyn hesitated, her legs shaking from exhaustion, but when Tahoma placed his hand lightly on her arm, it wasn't forceful, it was grounding. A surge of strength rippled through her. For the first time in years, she wasn't running alone. He led her swiftly across the grass, their bodies low, moving toward the cover of a dry creek bed. The earth smelled of dust and sagebrush, and the sky above glittered with stars like cold steel. Evelyn's heart still hammered, but something new crept into the rhythm: trust. Behind them, the shouts grew louder. "Spread out! Don't let her slip!" The dogs bayed, closer now, their claws scratching the dirt. Evelyn stumbled, her foot striking a stone. She hissed in pain, but Tahoma caught her, lifting her with ease as though she weighed nothing. His skin was warm against the chill night, his strength steady where hers faltered. "You'll slow us both down if you fight me," he whispered. She nodded, clinging to his shoulder as he carried her down into the creek bed. The walls of earth rose around them, sheltering them from sight. The warrior moved with the silence of a shadow, every step deliberate, every breath controlled. Evelyn felt the thud of his heartbeat where her hand pressed against his chest. Steady as a war drum, they stopped beneath an overhang of stone. Tahoma set her gently on the ground and crouched at the edge, scanning the ridges above. Lantern light bobbed across the horizon like restless fireflies, men shouting, dogs howling. "They're not giving up," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling. "They won't," Tahoma said. His tone was not despair but certainty, like the weather. "But I've seen men like them before." Loud, clumsy, too sure of themselves. His gaze flicked back to her, softer now. "They don't know the land." "I do." Evelyn hugged her arms around herself, the cold seeping through the torn fabric of her dress. Her whole body ached, but deeper still was the ache of disbelief that someone was standing between her and the cruelty she'd known her whole life. Why are you helping me?" she asked. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, his eyes fixed on the horizon, he said quietly, "Because once I ran barefoot too, and no one caught me." The weight of those words pressed into her heart. She wanted to ask more, but the sound of a dog's bark closer now silenced them both. Tahoma straightened, the moon catching the gleam of his tribal jewelry, the lines of his muscles tense with readiness. He reached for the knife at his belt. "They've crossed the line," he said, his voice low as the growl of thunder. "And I don't let men cross it twice." The dogs reached the edge of the dry creek before the men did. Their snarls cut through the night like blades, teeth flashing in the moonlight. Evelyn clutched her torn dress close, her back pressed to the cool wall of earth. The scent of damp soil mixed with the sharp tang of her fear. Every hair on her arm stood on end. Tahoma crouched ahead, one knee pressed into the dirt. His silhouette was carved from the night itself, still and unshaken. In his hand, the hunting knife caught the moonlight, its edge whispering danger. His other hand lifted slightly, palm open toward Evelyn, a silent command to stay quiet. "Stay hidden." The first hound leapt down into the creek bed, nails scraping the dry earth, growling low as it sniffed the air. Evelyn's breath caught. She thought of the scars her stepfather's dogs had left on livestock, and bile rose in her throat. Tahoma's eyes narrowed. With the swiftness of water spilling from a cliff, he lunged. His knife flashed, a single strike, quick and merciful. The dog fell silent. Evelyn gasped, pressing a hand over her mouth. But it was too late. The other dogs howled, their voices carrying like thunder through the prairie. Lanterns bobbed faster above the ridge. "There!" one of the men shouted. "In the creek!" Rifle barrels gleamed as figures leaned over the edge. Shots cracked, echoing like shattering glass. Dirt exploded around them, shards of rock biting at Evelyn's skin. She cried out, curling into the wall of earth. Tahoma threw himself over her, his body a shield, his arm braced against the ground. She could feel the heat of him, his heartbeat steady even as bullets split the air. For an instant, she thought he was made of stone, untouchable. When the gunfire paused, Tahoma moved. He rose with a power that startled her, grabbed a fist-sized stone, and hurled it with precision. A lantern shattered, plunging one ridge into darkness. The men cursed, stumbling. "They don't see us clearly now," he muttered. "Move!" He pulled Evelyn to her feet. Her legs trembled, but his grip steadied her. Together they slipped deeper along the creek bed, the shadows closing like a cloak around them. The night air was thick with dust, gunpowder, and the iron scent of blood. Evelyn's thoughts raced. This warrior, this stranger, had put himself between her and a firing line without hesitation. No man in her life had ever done that, and yet a sick dread twisted in her stomach. She knew her stepfather. He wouldn't stop, not when he believed he owned her. The voices of the pursuers echoed down the creek. "Fan out. Don't let him slip past." Tahoma stopped suddenly, listening. The muscles in his back tensed, his head turning like a hawk's. Evelyn strained to hear what he heard. The crunch of boots on stone, the shallow breaths of men who thought themselves hunters. He leaned close, his whisper brushing her ear. "They'll corner us here, but I know a way out." Her pulse pounded. "And if they catch us first?" His dark eyes flicked to hers, and something fierce burned there. "Then they'll wish they hadn't." They crept until the creek split in two, one path narrowing into a jagged passage beneath a rock shelf. Tahoma motioned her through, his frame filling the space behind her. The walls scraped her shoulders, earth cold and damp, but it led them into deeper shadows. Above, angry voices and lantern glow searched the open path they had abandoned. They emerged from the other side. Evelyn stumbled into a clearing where the moonlight bathed the land silver. A lone horse grazed quietly in the sagebrush, tethered to a tree. Evelyn's eyes widened. "Yours?" She whispered. "Tahom." I nodded once. "He'll carry us far before dawn." But even as hope flared, a voice split the night, closer than she. "Feared. Thought you could run, girl?" Her stepfather's shadow stepped from the sage, rifle raised, eyes glinting with rage. Evelyn froze, her heart lodging in her throat. The years of cruelty, the nights of bruises hidden beneath sleeves, the endless silence, it all pressed down on her like the weight of a storm. Tahoma shifted instantly, stepping in front of her once again. The moon caught the lines of his body, the curve of his knife, the unbreakable stance of a man who had already chosen his ground. "You'll not lay a hand on her," Tahoma said, voice steady, calm as a drumbeat before battle. Her stepfather's lips curled. "You don't know who you're crossing, warrior." "I don't need to," Tahoma replied. His grip tightened on the knife. "I only know what I won't allow." The prairie held its breath. The wind stilled. Between the man who had broken her spirit and the warrior who sought to protect it, Evelyn felt the world shift. This night would not end without blood. The prairie fell silent, as though even the crickets dared not sing. Moonlight spilled across the clearing, painting the earth in pale silver. Evelyn's breath caught in her chest. She pressed herself against the rough bark of a tree, her eyes locked on the two figures facing each other. Tahoma, his knife gleaming, and her stepfather, rifle raised and trembling with fury. "Step aside." "Warrior," the older man growled, his voice heavy with drink and power. "This is family business. That girl belongs to me." The word belongs twisted in Evelyn's stomach like a blade. For 25 years she had carried the weight of other people's decisions, their cruelty, their silence. But tonight, under the endless sky, something inside her cracked, and from that crack came light. "She doesn't belong to anyone," Tahoma said, his voice steady as stone. Her stepfather spat on the dirt, sneering. "You don't know what you're meddling in. She owes me. Her mother left me with nothing but a mouth to feed and debts to pay. I raised her, I worked her, I earned her obedience. And I'll take it." Evelyn's throat tightened. His words weren't new, They were the same shackles he had thrown at her for years, trying to bind her spirit. But spoken now, under the watchful stars, they sounded smaller. Weak Thoma took one step forward. His body moved like a predator's, calm, precise, every muscle carved with intent. You mistake cruelty for ownership. Tonight that ends. The rifle shook in her stepfather's hands. Then you'll die for a girl who ain't worth the dirt under her feet. Before Evelyn could cry out, the rifle fired. The crack tore through the clearing, echoing across the plains. Sparks flew from stone as the bullet missed, shattering rock. Evelyn screamed, hands flying to her ears. Thoma didn't flinch. In a heartbeat, he closed the distance. His knife flashed upward, striking the barrel of the rifle with a clang that rang like steel on steel. The gun spun from the older man's grip, landing in the dirt. Her stepfather stumbled. Cursing, fists raised now like a cornered animal, he swung at Thoma with drunken rage. The warrior moved like water, flowing aside, striking only when the opening came. His fist met the man's jaw with a sickening crack. The older man fell to his knees, spitting blood. You think you can take her from me? He roared, clutching his face. I'll hunt you to the ends of the earth. Thoma's knife glimmered inches from his throat. The warrior's chest rose and fell with the rhythm of battle, but his voice remained calm, steady as ever. No, he said, your hunt ends here. Evelyn pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Her whole body quivered with the weight of the moment. Fear that Thoma might end her stepfather's life. Fear that he wouldn't. Fear that the cycle would never break. Thoma? She whispered, her voice breaking. The warrior's eyes flicked to her, and something in his expression softened. He saw her not as prey to be returned, not as a burden to be carried, but as a woman on the edge of reclaiming her life. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered the blade. Your cruelty dies with your power, he told the stepfather, his tone like a verdict passed down by the earth itself. If you follow, if you harm her again, you will not see another dawn. The older man's face twisted in rage, but he stayed on his knees, blood dripping from his lip. He looked smaller now, reduced, the shadow of a tyrant crumbling under the weight of resistance. Thoma turned, placing a steady hand on Evelyn's shoulder. Come, this night is not safe for us. Her legs wobbled as she rose, but she leaned into his strength. His touch was grounding, like the earth after a storm. Together they walked toward the waiting horse, the sound of the stepfather's curses fading behind them. When Thoma lifted her onto the saddle, Evelyn felt the raw sting of her wounded feet and the ache of her weary body, but beneath it all was a fire she hadn't felt in years. Freedom. The warrior swung up behind her, his arms bracketing hers, reins in his calloused hands. The horse snorted, sensing urgency, and then they were off, pounding across the prairie, dust rising behind. Then, like smoke, the night air whipped her hair, carrying away the last echoes of her captivity. She pressed a hand against Thoma's arm, the strength there solid and real. For the first time, she believed she might have a future not written by someone else's cruelty. Behind them, in the distance, a broken man's rage was swallowed by the vast silence of the plains. Ahead, the horizon stretched endless and waiting. Evelyn closed her eyes, and for the first time in her 25 years, she prayed not for escape, but for tomorrow. The horse thundered across the open land, its hooves striking the hard earth like a drumbeat echoing through the night. Evelyn clung to the mane, her torn dress whipping in the wind, the raw sting of her cut feet throbbing with every movement. Behind her, she felt Thoma's steady presence, his arms guiding the reins, his chest a wall of strength against her back. The prairie opened wide before them, endless under the stars. Silver grass swayed in waves, stretching toward the horizon where the moon burned low, a weary lantern in the sky. Evelyn inhaled deeply, the cold air filling her lungs with something that felt sharper than pain: freedom. For miles, neither spoke. The night was alive only with the rhythm of the horse and the whisper of wind. Evelyn's heart beat so wildly she thought it might burst, not from fear, but from the weight of everything she had left behind. Each hoofbeat seemed to hammer the truth deeper. She wasn't going back, but freedom was fragile. As the first faint light of dawn bled into the horizon, Evelyn glanced back over her shoulder. She could see no lanterns, no riders, no stepfather storming after them. Yet the thought of him lingered, clinging to her like smoke. "Do you think he'll follow?" she asked, her voice barely above the rush of wind. Tahoma didn't answer. "Right away." His dark eyes scanned the horizon, always measuring, always listening. Finally, he said, "Men like him don't let go easily. But the land is wide, and I know its hidden paths. If he comes, he'll find I've led him into places he can't endure." Evelyn shivered. She didn't know whether to feel safer or more afraid. The stepfather's reach was long, his temper endless. But there was something in Tahoma's tone, not bravado, but certainty. He spoke like the earth itself backed his words. By sunrise, they slowed near a stretch of broken hills. Red stone jutted from the earth like ancient bones, casting long shadows over the ground. Tahoma reined the horse to a stop and slid down, offering his hand to Evelyn. Her legs wobbled as she dismounted. She nearly collapsed, the cuts on her feet, screaming as they touched the ground. Tahoma caught her before she fell. His grip was firm, yet careful, as though she might shatter if he held her too tightly. "You need rest," he said. "I'll be fine," she lied. Though the pain in her voice betrayed her, he crouched, lifting her foot gently into his hands. She tried to pull away, but his gaze held her. "You've walked long enough barefoot. Let me tend it." Evelyn stilled, watching as he tore a strip from his own leather sash and wrapped it around her bleeding heel. His fingers were calloused, but his touch was deliberate, almost reverent. She felt heat rush to her cheeks and quickly turned her face to the horizon. "No one's ever done that for me," she murmured. Tahoma tied the knot firmly. "Then those men you knew were not men." The words struck her deeper than he could have known. For a moment, silence hung between them, filled only by the cry of a hawk circling above. As the day wore on, they sheltered in the cool shade of a stone outcropping. Tahoma built a small fire, coaxing sparks from flint and dried grass. Evelyn watched him work, every movement precise, as though his hands remembered things his voice never spoke. "You've lived in the wild a long time," she said quietly. He glanced at her. The flames reflected in his eyes, making them burn like coals. "The wild is honest. It gives what it can, takes what it must. Men are not so honest." There was weight in those words, a history she could almost hear in his silence. Evelyn wanted to ask, what had he lost? What had driven him to wander the plains alone? But something in his posture warned her. He was a man who carried his past like a scar, visible but not for probing. Instead, she said softly, "I never thought I'd see the world beyond that farm. I never thought I'd breathe free air." Tahoma studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Freedom is not given, Evelyn. It is taken. Tonight you took it." The fire crackled between them, carrying the scent of burning sagebrush. Evelyn hugged her arms around herself, warmth spreading through her chest, not from the flames, but from his words. She wanted to thank him, but before she could, the horse snorted, ears flicking. Tahoma rose instantly, knife in hand, his eyes scanning the horizon. Evelyn followed his gaze. Far off, dust stirred against the pale morning sky. Riders. Her stomach dropped. "He found us." Tahoma's jaw tightened. He crouched, throwing dirt over the fire until smoke vanished. Then he looked at her with a calm fierceness that made her chest tighten. "We ride again," he said. "And this time they'll see where I draw the line." Evelyn's pulse thundered as she climbed onto the horse once more. As Tahoma swung up behind her, she felt the world tilt. The hunted had not yet escaped, and the battle for her freedom was far from over. By midday, the heat rolled off the land in waves, pressing against skin and stone alike. The horse labored hard beneath Evelyn and Tahoma, its sides slick with sweat. They had covered miles, yet the dust cloud behind them only grew. Proof that her stepfather's riders would not give up. Evelyn clutched the reins, knuckles white. "They're gaining," she whispered, her voice raw with fear. Tahoma's eyes narrowed. His jaw was set like iron, long black hair whipping behind him. "In the hot wind. Then we don't run farther. We make our ground here." The words chilled her. "But there are too many," he cut her off, his tone low and steady. "I've stood alone against worse. Fear will break them faster than numbers." He steered the horse into a cluster of sandstone cliffs, jagged and red, rising like fortress walls from the earth. The narrow canyon swallowed them whole, shadows cooling the air. Evelyn looked around, heart hammering. It was a dead end, yet she saw the truth in his plan. If they were to be hunted, better here, where the land itself could be their ally. They dismounted. Evelyn's legs trembled as her bare, bandaged feet touched the hot ground. Tahoma tied the horse in the shadows and turned to her, placing his large hand firmly on her shoulder. His touch carried both comfort and command. "Stay low. Do not move unless I call for you." Her throat tightened. "And you?" He slid the knife from his belt, the blade flashing in the sun. Then he drew a short spear from a hidden leather sheath strapped to the horse's side. His eyes met hers, unwavering. "I'll hold the line." The echo of hooves thundered into the canyon. Shouts bounced off the stone walls. Evelyn pressed against the cliff, breath shallow. Dust swirled as riders charged in. 5 men, rifles slung across their backs. Sweat-slick horses frothing at the mouth, dot at their front, rode her stepfather, rage twisting his face. "There, the heathen and the thief." His voice cracked with hatred. "Take her back, kill him." Evelyn's stomach lurched. The men spurred their horses forward, but Tahoma was already moving. He stepped into the open bare chest gleaming with sweat, spear leveled like a striking serpent. The canyon seemed to bend around him, amplifying his presence. His voice thundered, "You cross my ground now. Leave the woman, or none of you leave alive." The riders laughed, their cruelty echoing. But there was hesitation, just a flicker, as they saw the warrior's stance, his calm, unshaken eyes. Then the first man charged, his rifle swung up, too slow. Tahoma hurled the spear with deadly precision. It struck the man square in the shoulder, knocking him from his saddle with a scream. His horse bolted, colliding with another, chaos rippling through their line. "Damn you!" another shouted, firing wildly. Bullets ricocheted off stone, sharp sparks filling the canyon. Evelyn ducked, arms covering her head, heart slamming. Tahoma dove, rolled, came up with his knife in hand. A rider swung down, charging with fists. The warrior met him with a strike so swift Evelyn barely saw it. A twist, a blow, and the man crumpled into the dust. The canyon became a storm of dust, shouts, and the crack of gunfire. Tahoma moved through it like a force of nature, each motion precise, purposeful, unyielding. He was outnumbered, but not outmatched. Evelyn's stepfather sat back on his horse, shouting orders, too cowardly to enter the fray himself. His eyes locked on Evelyn, and his lips curled into a snarl. He pointed a rifle, not at Tahoma, but at her. Her scream split the canyon. Tahoma! The warrior turned, just in time. He leapt, planting himself between her and the rifle's muzzle. The shot cracked, deafening. Dust exploded against stone. Evelyn felt the shockwave rip through her. For a heartbeat, she thought he had fallen. But Tahoma stood tall, the bullet grazing only his arm, blood streaking down, but his grip steady on. The knife. His glare burned through the canyon. "That was your last shot," he growled. The men faltered. Two lay wounded, one dead still in the dust, the others shaken. The heat, the dust, the warrior's relentless fury, it all pressed on them like an invisible weight. One turned his horse, bolting out of the canyon. Another followed, fear cracking his resolve. Only her stepfather remained, teeth bared, rifle shaking in his hands. "You can't take her," he roared. "She's mine." Evelyn stepped forward, voice trembling but clear. "I am not yours, not anymore." Her stepfather froze, the words striking him harder than any blade. For the first time, she saw something she never thought possible in his eyes. Weakness. Tahoma advanced slowly, blood trailing down his arm, knife glinting. His presence filled the canyon, towering, unbreakable. "This ends tonight." Her stepfather's grip faltered. The rifle dropped into the dust. He backed away, muttering curses, but his eyes darted with fear. Then, with a final snarl, he whipped his horse and fled into the open plains. Dust trailing behind him, silence fell. The canyon was littered with echoes of violence, blood on stone, dust in the air, the faint groans of the wounded. Evelyn sank to her knees, shaking, tears streaking her dirt-stained cheeks. Tahoma sheathed his knife, breath heavy but steady. He walked to her, crouched, and gently touched her face with his uninjured hand. "You're safe now," he murmured. Evelyn's lips quivered. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but no words came. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her heart swelling with something she hadn't known in years, safety, hard-won and real. For the first time, she dared to believe the nightmare was ending. The dawn that broke after the storm was unlike any she had ever seen. The world felt washed clean, as if the heavens themselves had rinsed away the blood, the dirt, and the cruelty of the night before. For the first time in years, Clara no longer just a frightened stepdaughter running from chain stood barefoot in the prairie grass, breathing in freedom. Beside her, the warrior man Tala stood with quiet strength. His long black hair clung damp against his chest, but his stance was unshaken, his eyes fixed on the horizon as though he could see a future neither of them yet dared to imagine. The tribe that had ridden out with him lingered in the distance, watching, waiting. They had given her food, water, even blankets, but more than that, they had given her safety. The world Clara had known, bound to her stepfather's cruelty, was gone. But in its place stood a choice, one she had never thought she'd be free enough to make. "Your stepfather will search for you," Tala said finally, his voice like low thunder in the quiet morning. "Men like him do not give up easily." Clara swallowed hard. His words carried truth. She could already imagine the search parties, the accusations, the twisted stories her stepfather would spin to turn others against her. She would not be painted as a victim, she would be branded as a runaway, a thief, perhaps even worse. But when she looked at Tala, she found courage rise within her. "Then let him search," she whispered. "I'm not going back." Tala's gaze softened, though his jaw remained firm. "The road ahead will not be easy. If you stay with me, you will live by the way of my people, under the open sky, through hardship, through battles not of your making." Clara thought of the years she had spent tending to another man's fields, her spirit chained by fear. Hardship she had known, hunger she had tasted, violence she had endured. But here, standing before the warrior who had stepped into her life like a force of fate, She saw a different kind of struggle, a struggle worth living for. "I would rather face the world with nothing but freedom," she said, her voice trembling but true, "than live another day in chains." The warrior studied her for a long moment, the silence between them filled only by the distant cries of hawks circling the prairie. Then, slowly, he reached for her hand. His palm was calloused, his grip strong, grounding her in the earth beneath her feet. For the first time in years, she did not flinch at a man's touch. The tribe approached, their horses snorting, their faces lit by the golden light of the rising sun. One of the elders, a woman with braids streaked silver, looked at Clara with the kind of gaze that weighed hearts, not appearances. She nodded once, approvingly, as though she had seen the girl's spirit and found it worthy. Tala helped Clara mount a horse. She swayed slightly, unused to the height, but his hand steadied her. Around them, the riders formed a circle, their presence both shield and promise. As the sun lifted higher, the prairie stretched wide and endless before them. Clara looked back only once toward the faint speck of smoke rising where her stepfather's farm still stood. The house that had been her prison now looked small, fragile, and distant, like a shadow she no longer belonged to. Tala's voice came steady beside her. "From this day on, you are not what was done to you. You are who you choose to be." Her chest tightened, tears slipping free, but they were not tears of fear. They were the release of years carried too heavily. She nodded, whispering, "Then I choose to be free." With that, the riders spurred their horses forward. The wind rushed against her face, carrying the scent of sage and wild grass, the thunder of hooves pounding like a heartbeat of destiny. Clara held on not in fear, but in exhilaration as the warrior rode beside her, his figure unshakable, his presence like a promise written against the sky. The horizon stretched endlessly ahead. The past was gone. The future was unwritten. And together they rode into it, two souls bound not by blood or chains, but by the unbreakable truth of freedom.